The courthouse was filled with a palpable sense of tension as the case of Marcus Johnson was about to unfold. The young man sat at the defendant's table, his hands clenched, a tightness in his chest that wouldn't let go. At 28, he had already spent too much time fighting against a system that saw him as guilty before he could even say a word in his defense. Today, he would face the full weight of it. Marcus was accused of assaulting a police officer during a protest, a crime he didn't commit, a crime that was rooted more in the fear of a black man standing up for what was right than any real violence. The evidence? A video, one that painted a different picture than the one the system was trying to sell. The footage was clear. Marcus wasn't the aggressor. The officers had moved in on the protest, pushing through a crowd of peaceful demonstrators. Marcus had been trying to protect a woman, one of the many who had been shoved and roughed up by the police. He reached out to help her, but before he knew it, an officer had shoved him to the ground, pinning him beneath a knee as he gasped for air. But to the prosecution, the truth didn't matter. They saw only what they wanted to see, a black man who posed a threat. It was easier to believe that than confront the reality that it was the police who had used excessive force, that it was Marcus, caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, trying to be a good person in a world that often punished people for just that. Amanda Taylor, his defense attorney, was the only one in the courtroom who didn't seem like she was fighting an uphill battle. She stood confidently, her voice calm but unwavering as she addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Amanda began, her eyes scanning the room with a sharpness that made even the prosecutor flinch. "You've seen the footage, you've heard the testimonies, and what I'm asking you to do is simple. Believe your eyes, not the lies. Marcus Johnson is no criminal. He's a man who was unjustly attacked, a man who was doing what any good person would do, protecting those who needed it most." Her words weren't just directed at the jury. They were a message to the entire system, a system that had failed black people for centuries, a system that had, time and time again, placed them in the position of the accused, no matter how much they tried to fight back. Marcus could barely focus on the trial as Amanda spoke. His mind kept drifting back to that night, the chaos of the protest, the shouts of the crowd, and the officer's knee on his neck. He could still feel the suffocating pressure. He remembered the woman's terrified face as she was dragged away by the police and how he had done everything in his power to help, to protect her. But in the eyes of the officers, and in the eyes of the system, Marcus was the one who had committed the crime. He wasn't alone in his fight, though. There was a flicker of hope in the room, the kind that always burned bright when someone was willing to stand up against the odds. That hope was Amanda. And it was the same hope that had carried Marcus through every unfair encounter he'd ever had with the law. She wasn't just fighting for his innocence. She was fighting for every black person who had ever been wronged, for every soul that had ever been crushed by the weight of systemic racism. Across from her sat David Grayson, the prosecutor. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his face a mask of disdain. He was no stranger to this game. He had worked cases like this before, all aimed at one thing, upholding the narrative that black men were threats to society, that they were violent, disruptive, dangerous, and that they deserved whatever punishment the system deemed fit. Grayson stood to make his case, his voice cold and sharp. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he said, his eyes sweeping the room, "we're not here to debate the facts. We're here to address the truth. Marcus Johnson wasn't protecting anyone. He was attacking an officer. His actions were reckless, his intent was clear, and the consequences of his violence could have been much worse." The jury sat in silence, the weight of Grayson's words sinking in. But Marcus knew this was a battle that had already been won before it even started. He'd seen it before, the way the system twisted the truth to fit its own narrative. But the truth, no matter how hard they tried to bury it, had a way of surfacing. Amanda Taylor stepped forward again, her tone quiet but forceful. "You've heard what they want you to believe, but it's time to hear the truth. Marcus Johnson was an innocent man caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. A man whose life was nearly destroyed by an unjust system that targeted him because of his skin color. And now, we ask you to make a choice, to be the voices of reason, of justice. The room was still as Amanda's words echoed in the air. The jury looked at each other, the weight of the decision pressing down on them. There was no room for mistakes here, no room for half-truths. What they decided in the next few moments would determine not just Marcus's future, but the future of everyone who had ever been wronged by a system that refused to see them as human. The judge called for the verdict. The room seemed to hold its breath as the jury filed back into the room, their expressions unreadable. And then, in a voice that seemed to shake the very walls of the courtroom, the foreman spoke. "We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty." The words hit Marcus like a wave of relief, a wave of vindication. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as his family rushed to embrace him, tears in their eyes. Amanda gave him a nod, her face softening with the smallest hint of a smile. It wasn't just a victory for Marcus. It was a victory for every black man and woman who had ever fought for justice, for truth, for the right to simply exist without fear. As Marcus walked out of the courthouse, his head held high, the sun broke through the clouds and shone down on him. The battle wasn't over. The fight for justice was far from done. But for today, Marcus Johnson had won. And as long as there were people like him, people who refused to be silenced, the system would never be able to keep them down.